So, guys, I want to talk about this video that I saw on Instagram, and I know this is kind of like an older one, where where what happens is that there's a kid having a Ninja Mutant Turtles themed birthday party, and what happens is that they're blowing on the cake, and one of the relatives, I believe it's like their aunt, like just takes the kid's head and dunks the kid's face into the cake, and and then she's trying to hug the kid and be like, it's a funny moment, and then the kid gets mad and he attempts to push the cake off the cake mount and just destroy it because he's angry that she made a fool out of him. And I want to talk a little bit about this, like pranking children. That some people may think that okay, it's just to add to the fun of the event, but what people don't realize is a couple of things. That first of all, you may it just puts attention on you, and it's kind of almost like like saying, oh well, I gotta be the crazy aunt, or I gotta be the crazy mom, or the crazy dad, or the crazy uncle, the crazy brother, where I gotta just interject myself in somebody else's moment. So people don't realize that it is selfish. The other thing is that you may have a kid that just doesn't like being messed with, and sometimes people may say, oh well, that kid needs to just add to the humor, or just just not be so uptight and serious. But then I also will say, what would happen if my grandma Madeline, she had her 80th birthday. So what would happen if that same kid just like decided to grab my grandmother's head and dunk her head into the cake and be like, happy 80th birthday? Like, more than likely he would get a whooping or whatever, really, because it's like that old saying of like, treat others the way you want to be treated. Like, how would a parent feel, or if their kid was doing this to a relative or a grandmother or somebody else, really? Or what would happen if hypothetically I was celebrating my girlfriend's birthday in college and in high school, and my younger brother decided to do that? Like, I would just whoop my younger brother's ass, be like, hey, what, this is my girlfriend, you don't treat her that way, and you think you can put your hands on an adult, really? So how does it it's just like what call the Rochelle parenting, like Rochelle from Everybody Hates Chris, where it seems like like adults can disrespect and prank children, and children are taught to like be like, oh, you gotta just buck it up and let it go and just enjoy the moment or enjoy the introduction of comedy. But when children treat adults the exact same way, then that's when they get a whooping, or that's when they just get like punished for their behavior. So it kind of creates something that I see in this culture, and that's kind of what happened with a lot of baby boomer children, or millennials, like the children of baby boomers, where we're kind of taught that parents have the right to disrespect us. They have the right to kind of like, if they're going through a bad day, or they need to yell at another sibling, they can yell and curse at our birthday parties, or they can be like, I'm, or they can be like, what, I'm Jesus fucking Christ, like, you've ruined the fucking day or whatever. Like, just make something about themselves, really. But when their children do that, that's when they get the back of the hand and everything like that, really. So it kind of is part of this culture of adults disrespecting children and expecting respect back, really, and that doesn't really work. The next thing that I would say is I understand the kids' feelings, and because most kids don't like being pranked, and then also it's a moment for them, so they don't want to be the butt of somebody's joke, really. And ultimately it's just stupid humor. It's just like saying, can we have, can I have a moment where I can have my cake? Can I have a moment where I'm not just being made a jackass, really? And it doesn't mean that the kid's too soft. It just means just stop fucking with kids, really. And it reminds me of a couple of things that happened, really. I remember like one time when I was like 8 years old, my father and I were waiting for my other dad and my brother to come back from a field trip, and I failed to realize that that we're gonna be waiting for a couple of hours in the car together. So I remember like my dad telling me that I could walk on home, and this is somebody, I know it was the early 90s, but you're expecting like a 7-year-old to walk, like maybe like a mile home by himself, really. And I remember my dad laughing at me in my face, and then I smacked him, and then he smacked the shit out of me. And it kind of comes down to that thing about like how, oh, well, my dad can disrespect me and I have to take it. But when I kind of like, hey, you're being an asshole to me, but I can knock the shit out of you. It goes down to what I've said about the Rochelle parenting, So, so that's one thing, but that's kind of like in this example, like where the kid's ruining the birthday party. Like maybe he got punished, or maybe his parents like, okay, you're not opening your gifts for a while because you decided to destroy your cake. You decided to ruin the moment when they're not holding this relative responsible for ruining the kid's party. So it kind of goes down to that conversation of double standards, and it also can teach the kid to grow up and be like, hey, I don't like birthday parties, or I don't want to have parties anymore, or I don't want to celebrate my birthday, or if the parents are like, for dessert you're gonna have the last slice of birthday cake, and the kid's like, no, I don't want it, or takes the cake, throws it in the trash, and the parents like, why'd you do that? You're like, oh well, I don't like my birthday because of what happened to me when I was younger, where people were pranking me, making me look stupid. So create a lifelong thing where kids just don't want to celebrate their birthdays with relatives. And then it also kind of reminds me of another thing that happened when I was in middle school, that I almost punched my dad in the face, really, because what happened was that there was like, me and my family were watching TV, and my little brother was adopted. So my dad took his pacifier, cleaned it off, and instead of putting it in his mouth, he put it in my mouth. And then it was almost like, like this is a grown man who's like 40 grabbing like my face and putting a pacifier in it and making me look stupid. Like I wanted to punch my dad and clock him out, really, because I was like, what, you're trying to make me look stupid, you're trying to make me look goofy, and it doesn't, and there's clearly some mental disorder you must have, really, to do that. But embarrassing children in front of relatives is not good. And then also psychologically, there are some children who grow up to have no sense of shame, who grow up to have low self-esteem and low self-respect because they have parents that believe in pranking them. They have parents that believe in making them look like fools, or taking their moments, or humiliating them in front of relatives. And then also too, it can also just teach, like kids, why do I want to have a family? Or it can teach kids to have a bunch of anger issues because they're like, okay, well, people fuck with me, but I'm not allowed to fuck with people back, type of thing, really. And then also, there's also the mental illness thing, that sometimes there's children with mental illness. Like I was misdiagnosed with autism, so my parents would poke me, or they would punch a wall to startle me. Or I've said, like in middle school, my dad had a thing of slapping me in the butt. Like, he was like, the same way you would slap a girlfriend in the butt or a wife in the butt type of thing, really. And it's almost like if I ever reported those things to my therapist, they'd say, hey, we need to remove you because, a grown 40-year-old man who's a homosexual is spanking your ass, really, and chuckling like, this is just like hot to him. What would happen if I develop a pattern to cut myself? Or what would happen if I talked to school, or there was a school assembly about diversity in high school. Some people were sharing stories of child abuse. What happened if I said, hey, you know what? I don't like having gay parents because one of the things that happened is that my dad smacks my ass and he's chuckling, and he also startles me and punches walls because I was misdiagnosed with autism. And one of the issues with autistic people is that they startle, or they don't like to be touched, really. So he just kind of sees me as a pet, or almost like, he likes kind of to get off on my quirks, really. The same way some people know that dogs whine or yelp when they don't have an owner around. So some people will intentionally keep their dogs in crates for hours upon hours because they want to get off on how funny it is to hear the dog be whining and howling, unreasonably. So, pranky kids can evolve into like another big issue where, it could be a form of emotional abuse. It could be a form of parents thinking that they can violate, their children's bodies or their rights almost. And then also too, like it just can create kids with anger issues or low self-esteem, or people who don't want to have families, or people like me. Now I'm like almost 40 and I'm doing videos online and I'm talking about like, controversies around my life, really, or how I was raised, like I don't think that my dad would be happy saying like, oh, well, he did all these things for me, but I'm doing a video and I'm mentioning things about sexual harassment jokes and being smacked and having low self-esteem and other things like that, but feelings do come out, really. But, that's why I kind of say, we always have to treat children with respect. And sometimes we make mistakes, but the point of it is that we learn. And we also just understand too that, especially with internet culture, that, sometimes pranking kids is not right. Or sometimes when they have something special, like a special moment, like a birthday or a prom picture or whatever, really. Like imagine if somebody threw invisible ink on their kid during their wedding or during their prom or whatever, and on their date, and they're like, oh, it's gonna fade away, and then the kid loses their temper and just decks their parent in the face, really, because they're like, what, that needs to stop, really, there needs to be consequence for your actions, and you just need to stop being that fart in church or whatever, And then what happens if you have kids that grow up to be like Jackass or Viva La Bam or whatever, where they're like, okay, now I'm going to be the master prankster on my parents, really. So it's like what I said, pranking kids is not right. It's disrespectful and selfish, and that can just create a whole can of worms. Sometimes it's like the old saying goes, like it may be funny to you, but it may not be funny to the other person, and it may, it may not be funny to the other person. It may be selfish for you. So, pranking people is not right.